Good evening, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see you all here this evening. For those of you that don't know, my name is Jo Applin. I'm Reader in the History of Art here at the Courtauld, where I'm also currently head of the History of Art department. I'm a specialist in modern and contemporary art, and so I'm particularly pleased to welcome you all here this evening on behalf of the Sculptural Processes group here at the Courtauld. The group comprises a group of scholars, curators, conservators, makers, artists, art historians and writers based both here at the Courtauld but also beyond our own faculty and research community. As a group, we get together in various ways, and we're interested in the diverse ways, I suppose, in which objects and materials, their surfaces, their processes and modes of production can come to mean across an array of works of art. The questions we ask of the object are as much conceptual as material, and each year we invite a contemporary artist to come and speak about their work, and we are thrilled that Marc has agreed to join us tonight. Hi. Marc Quinn is one of the leading artists of his generation. He came to prominence in the 1990s as one of the original so-called YBAs. Since then, he's gone on to produce a body of sculptures, paintings, drawings, and more that explore the relationships between art and science, humans and nature, the human and the post-human body, and our relationships with each other. He makes art about what it is to be a person living in the world. His work also connects frequently and meaningfully with art history, from modern masters right back to antiquity. Unusually, Marc trained as an art historian at university, and this kind of deep knowledge, we think, here at the Institute where we study the history of art, a deep knowledge both of art's histories and the changing status of the object in all its material, political and theoretical possibilities. And this is a trademark of his diverse and rich career too. First gained notoriety with the sculpture Self in 1991. This was a cast of the artist's head made from pints of his own frozen blood. It's an iconic work. I still remember seeing it for the first time as a young art historian in training, being mesmerised, horrified, and utterly seduced by the kinds of uncomfortable questions an artwork can ask of us. This kind of discomfort and questioning of beauty or the body or difference, of the anxious relationship between the natural and man-made world, between art, science and technology, have continued to underpin Marc's work over his long and distinguished career to date. Other critically acclaimed works include Garden, a large-scale frozen flower garden commissioned by the Fondazione Prada in Milan, the DNA portrait of Sir John Soane, which is commissioned and owned by the National Portrait Gallery in London, Alison Lapper Pregnant, which of course we'll know is exhibited on the fourth plinth of London's Trafalgar Square, Siren, the 2008 solid gold sculpture of the model Kate Moss, which was displayed at the British Museum. As well, you'll remember the colossal replica of Alison Lapper Pregnant that was commissioned for the 2012 Paralympics opening ceremony, and Frozen Wave from 2015, a 7.5 metre long sculpture created from the fragment of an eroded shell that was shown at Somerset House in London until January, our home, of course. In 2017, his All About Love was a series of life-cast sculptures that examined the physical language of love that was displayed at Sir John Soane Museum, also in London. And so we're going to be discussing a number of these works and other themes with Marc this evening, including his latest large-scale work titled Our Blood. I'd just like to now introduce my colleague Pierre Gottschaller, who is Senior Lecturer in the Conservation and Technology Department at the Courtauld and a specialist in modern and contemporary art. Before joining the Courtauld in 2017, Pierre was a Senior Research Specialist in the Science Department of the Getty Conservation Institute in LA, and prior appointments included positions as Paintings Conservator at the Tate in London, at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and at Harvard Art Museums. So after our discussion with Marc, which is going to be fairly free-flowing, we've got some questions that we're excited to ask him and hear his responses to. We'll open up, we'll have some time for questions from the audience, and after that you're invited to join us upstairs on the third floor in our student common room, and we'll have a glass of wine. Okay, so I'm going to come over and join you now. Okay, so I'm going to start off, Mark, by asking you, can you hear?
Do you have to hold it?
Can you hear, or do we need to hold it? Andrew, do we need to hold them, or? Okay, thank you. So, as I said, you trained as an art historian. Many of your works have made reference to the history of art at the level of materials or subject matter. I just wondered if you could just say a bit about that and how your background has affected your work or not, or whether you're welcome to talk us through some images there. But it would be really interesting for us to hear about how your training as an art historian has impacted on your work, your practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say because I don't know. There's not a control version of me that didn't do it, so I can't really tell. But I mean, obviously, I'm interested in the history of art, and I've, very much see art as a continuum, and all art's once contemporary. But art's also a kind of time travel machine, a sort of emotional or philosophical or sort of, it's a great work of art is always in the present moment, even if it's made 5,000 years ago, and you're with it. You feel like you're in the present moment with it, like being with a living person. And I think that's the difference between artwork and artifact. An artifact is something that's kind of like left behind the rearview mirror, and it's really fascinating because it's from a period, and a great work of art from a period is always now. So there is this connection. And so when I'm making work for now, but I'm also making work so that in 500 years' time people can look at it and have a connection to now. So it's this kind of interesting kind of continuation. Whether that comes from studying art history or if it's just something that I had anyway, I don't know. But it enabled me to be in libraries and looking through books for a few years, going to museums for a few years and doing all that kind of stuff. So I think it made me connect with art that's been before, and I love all art, and ancient art to now. So, and it often inspires my work, but I always want my work to be about the contemporary world and the world we live in, and to bring that into art in all its forms. And sometimes that can be the subject matter, like in 2010 I felt that people's sense of identity was shifting, and people were changing their sex, and people were having plastic surgery and transforming themselves, and I did a whole show about that. And these were subjects at the time weren't seen as part of the discourse of art. So sometimes it's bringing in new subjects and reflecting how the world is, and sometimes it's using art to change the world, as in the final project that we're going to look at, or perhaps in the Alison Napa or something like that. So I think that art is crucial to society and to people, in my view, and it should be about meaning and thoughts and a philosophical inquiry into the world, and not just be making sort of decorative objects, although obviously beautiful things can have a part of it, but it's about making compelling things rather than beautiful things, to me.
And I'm guessing contemporary art wasn't necessarily a part of what your training would have been?
No, I did Rembrandt and I can't remember what else, some other stuff.
It was very exciting that our art historians continue to remember their curriculum for many years.
But also, I just spent tons of time just auto-dictating in the library and just looking at all different things. But it was also, it was great. I enjoyed it.
And is it about that immediate reaction or connection with a work? So rather than that's interesting, I'm going to go to the library and find out about its history, its context, it's somehow this idea.
I think everything. It's all the different things, and I just read books about art all the time and flick between them. I think yesterday I read something about Cy Twombly, something about ancient Indian sculpture, and something about something that I've forgotten. But just picking things up and reading a couple of pages.
And is that for inspiration, like visual, or your
or just to kind of get me thinking, to change my patterns of thinking, and to start thinking about something in a different way. And just visiting that lab that we just did here, and looking at all the bits of painting and the X-rays and stuff is really interesting as well. So I think anything can inspire. art, and anything should inspire art. And I think art should be about the world and not just be a kind of hermetic. I mean, I think when I started making art, I was a little bit more of art was this little bubble next to the world. And I think that it was really important to bring the world into art and art into the world.
And is that the moment when you thought this is what you wanted to do? Like, I'm interested in that shift where you decide that this is what you're going to do. Is it when you realise that you can say something about the world?
I don't know. No, I think it's just a kind of instinct to do something. And then it just kind of just keep on doing it, and it's sort of, you get more and more drawn into it, I suppose.
When you said before that you would hope that your art would be around for 5,000 years, I, the conservative, become extremely nervous.
Of course, you're very excited by that. And also I make things that are all about that.
Yes.
Like, you know, a sculpture you have to keep frozen forever is a neurotic nightmare of that. It's very much in the present moment all the time. It's like if you don't look after, it's like a baby in an incubator or something. It's on life support.
I was going to ask you later about self, but since you bring it up, you know, well, and I think one probably should also ask you to show.
Look at something.
Look at I mean, these
about images. So
these are early pieces, and they're made in bread. So I made an armature. And obviously this is like, you know, I was looking at 18th century sculpture, and I would make the piece in a bread dough and chuck it on as quickly as possible onto the chicken wire, and then put it in a big kiln and cook it. And then as it cooks, bits fall off, and it, you know, as it expands, it kind of changes shape. And so you end up with these forms that look like they've been under the sea for 1,000 years, or they're kind of like caricatures or degraded or decomposing. And then these particular ones are then cast in metal so that actually they do last, but then some of the other ones are in bread, and some of them have survived since the 80s.
have they?
Yeah, as long as you keep them dry, they're okay, although if you get insect infestation, then you can be in trouble.
Put a lot of salt in.
I should have done, but I put, and I mean that one as well. If you look at the bottom of the feet of that one, it micete away the feet of it. So, which is kind of interesting because it's a sculpture about hunger in a way, and so the process of making it is kind of kept in the sculpture, which is something I like to do anyway. But then these ones were, I just made these sculptures in my hand, and obviously every time you cook it, it's different. So it's almost like it was a parody on the idea of that your destiny is written in your hand. In fact, that your destiny changes every moment with every decision you make at any moment.
Is that why you emphasize?
Yeah, exactly. So they're all the lines are different. But obviously, these are in frames. Some of them still exist, some of them have decomposed. But I kind of like that as well.
Okay.
You knew that from
keep that in mind when we come to
you knew that from when you made them, that this was that they had.
Well, I think that they had
shelf
the
life,
possibility. I think that, you know, it's nice to use a whole gamut of materials from completely organic to completely inorganic. Something that lasts 1 million years, like a plastic bag, for instance, that you might not think would last for thousands of years, and then something that is. But then it's also quite nice to keep, like, I think this is actually from a different thing, but that's one from, it says 2017, but it's actually one from 1991 that I found in a box the other day. So
it's stunning.
It's in perfect condition. It dried out a bit, but it's quite nice to find something ephemeral that's like, it's like when you find a bit of wedding cake from flowers.
There are other examples from Daniel Spörri, for example, where that wasn't the case, and the bread pieces have been completely eaten. And by now, you know, they're shells and they've been filled with resin.
Some resin or something.
And then that brings up a whole other question of, is it still the original
Well, I think it depends if the work, it depends, doesn't it? And it's more difficult when the artist isn't around to make a decision.
Yes.
But then maybe it's a kind of, it's like a little stone in the road for people like you. You have to make those decisions.
I don't think we'll ever be unemployed, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, you'll never be unemployed. But I think that it is, the nature of the material world is a subject for sculpture. And I think that that includes things falling apart.
So on the subject of things falling apart, your work self, which is still in process, you are making a new head every 5 years.
Yeah, the work is all of them. So the first one is the one that is well known here, and then there's now 6 of them that are all around the world in different places.
And the thing that I've found interesting, but I imagine is also very important, is that you're not just making new versions of the first one, but you're also taking a mold of your head as it ages. Yeah. So my question is, do you, when you have made a new cast of a head, do you look at it and, because the surface is never quite perfect and you see seams, so do you sometimes recast it if you're not happy with the first version?
Not usually, I just do whatever comes out. And usually, I mean, as you probably know, you can make 5 casts of your head within 2 hours and they all look completely different. They're not really, they're sort of, they look like a baby that's just been born, it's just kind of all squashed up and its face is sort of, or a corpse's head, so it's kind of birth and death and transformation. And it sort of looks like you, but not really. And also some of the earlier ones are older than the later ones because of the randomness of the moulding as well. So it's a bit like Rembrandt redone by Beckett or something. It's like the same thing again. It fails again every time, but it succeeds as well in a kind of way.
Okay. Do you think that your own progression through time and seeing a new head, even though it might not be a perfect copy of your actual self in that moment, but do you see a change in your attitude towards the change in the sculptures you have already made? I mean, with the bread sculptures, you've just explained it, but do you have that same peaceful acceptance of change with regard to every other group of works?
No, I think our works that are meant to be perfect drive you mad if they're imperfect. Because, if you use some kind of metal and it starts to oxidize because it's been badly cast or whatever, that's intensely irritating. So it's only if you've conceived it as part of the work that it should change, then that's fine. But if you've conceived it as to be completely perfect and then it's imperfect, then that's not fine. Well, I haven't reached that point of enlightenment yet, anyway, to accept that.
Well, I've noticed that you in interviews and publications, you tend to use the word maintenance rather than conservation when it comes to, for example, making a steel sculpture perfect again. Is that then very consciously chosen because that is a different concept?
I think, some things, like a stainless steel sculpture, if you put it outside, will always, even though no one ever tells you this, will always rust in some ways. And you just have to make sure it's properly cleaned and is cleaned regularly, and the moment anything comes up, you clean it, and then it's fine. If you leave it out there for 5 years doing nothing, then it's going to be a nightmare. Yeah. So there's this. So weirdly enough, there's the same kind of engagement of engagement between the person responsible and the object in something that seems to be completely perfect, like a piece of stainless steel, as there is between a frozen sculpture. It's probably easier to maintain a frozen sculpture than a piece of stainless steel in some weird way, even though you think it shouldn't need any maintenance.
Because you can control the immediate now you know how to control the immediate environment. when it comes to fabrication, because a lot of your pieces involve this very particular expertise, and it seems like you work with a wide range of fabricators.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the concept of authenticity? How strongly do you feel that you need to have maybe even manual involvement at some point?
I think it depends on each piece. I mean, some pieces are just, a piece like that, I have to obviously make it completely myself. Yeah. But if I'm never going to be casting something in a foundry or carving it in marble or any of these transformative mediums. I mean, I could carve something in marble, but I haven't so far. I've used it in the traditional transformative way. Yeah. I mean, not transformative, copying way. Yeah. But I think it depends on each thing. I think usually my view is if there's artistic decisions needed in the process of creation, I have to do it. If the artistic vision is to make it exactly like that in that, I don't have to do it. So if I want to cast that glass exactly in bronze, there's no point in me making it. But if during that process I might decide to change it, then I have to do it.
When it comes to painting, however, it seems that you have become a lot more involved again. There's this statement that you made not very long ago about how if you want to be a successful artist, you have to make paintings that move no one and that which people can put in their apartments.
No, I said that's not the kind of painting I want to make.
Okay.
Did I say? Yeah, I said if you want to be successful, make things that don't offend anyone and get a fit in a lift in a New York apartment or something. Yeah. Did I say that or someone else said it?
That's a paraphrase, but yeah. That's what he said. And when we look at your work, you've avoided paintings for a long time. But in recent years, you have come up with modifications of the painting process that I find very interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm doing lots. I just came from doing it now, actually. I might have we got one here? Hold on. Yeah, I mean, these ones, which are basically, that's why I asked you in the other room if you can tell what's underneath something by X-raying it.
The wrong answer.
Yeah. So these paintings are kind of evolution of these ones, which are from a series called history paintings. So they're pictures taken from press photographs of riots and uprisings and civil strife from about 2011 on. So I'd find a press picture, in this case from Athens and Istanbul, and then make a photorealistic painting of that. And then when I finished, I just kind of got all the paint off the palette and chucked it on top. And then one day I just kept on chucking the painting on top until I got to that, which is...
And this is oil paint. How do you keep the oil paint from mixing? It's amazing how...
Well, each little globule is mixed on the palette, and then I throw it onto the canvas, and it's like a build-up of... And it's got a kind of... But it's quite stiff, oil paint, unless you make it runny. And it just sort of, when it hits the canvas, it mixes... So these are the sort of 1 centimetre square sections of the one we saw before. So it mixes, and then you just keep throwing stuff on top. So there's this sense of the impact of the paint creates the mixture, and there's almost the process again is creating this final kind of. I suppose what it really is doing is articulating the physics of something hitting something, because if it was just white, it would just look like a white sponge. But because it's different colours, you can see which bits of the material are stretched and which ones move. So it's almost like
they're these strings.
Yeah, they're like strings, or they're like the kind of nerves, or like it's almost like you've cut open someone's brain or something. They're like synapses or something like that. and then they're paintings with a sort of unconscious, because they have an image behind them, but you don't know what the image is. So you're looking at this picture, and...
Okay. Would you be upset if we were able to find out what's on it?
Well, and some of them, I was talking today to someone, I was thinking, I wonder if I should stop telling people what's underneath. And then if I did, could they ever find out?
Well, then we need to discuss what you need to use underneath.
Or not use.
Or medium, yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So I'm interested in that. And so really it's very much, I mean, almost you could say it's a sculpture or a painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the, I mean, this is projecting, this has got, it's almost relief surface, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's sort of quite thick. And it's almost like the corner of a Monet, like one little tiny bit of a tiny impressionist kind of thing, but just blown up to the whole painting. So they're called chaos paintings. So they're almost, to me, like the kind of white noise of the world blotting out what's underneath. And in the case of the history paintings, you know, you have these great events or whatever of history, but they always get forgotten. There's always something new. It's a bit like the Bruegel painting of Icarus, where the boy's fallen out of the sky and into the sea, but the guy just keeps ploughing the field and someone else eating their apple, and the world goes on. So it's a sense of whether something of I guess our relative importance in the universe and stuff. But also they're very micro, so as you zoom in they get more and more complex, and you get drawn into the whole sort of web of it in a way. But I do like the unconsciousness of having the secret image is interesting.
I mean, this level of experimentation is really striking in your practice. There's a kind of restlessness that you move between such a diverse range of media. It's really striking. Are there materials that you think I want to? So what comes first? I mean, there's a kind of it's conceptual, and then you think what material.
It depends, really. I mean, like, I kind of thought I wanted to make some oil painting, but I wanted to do something different with it, and I like the idea that you could have painted it 500 years ago, and that it's just a conceptual change. It's not a new technique or a new there's nothing there that you couldn't have painted in the Renaissance. It's just a mental. It's about the world today in a way.
The coloration probably is the biggest.
Some of the pigments maybe, but then I tend to use kind of quite classical pigments. But then maybe they didn't exist. Like sort of, which ones didn't exist? Did metals?
Azurite.
I don't use that.
Ultramarine.
I use ultramarine.
But French ultramarine probably.
But ultramarine I thought came from a stone from Afghanistan.
It did, although recently another source in Chile was discovered.
Okay.
But yes, most of it.
But does ultramarine now still have that stone in it, or is it a synthetic pigment?
It's a synthetic process that was invented in France in the 18th century.
So is that going to fade?
But it chemically is. There's actually a Vivas in the audience. She can pipe up. Chemically, it's the same. So it's very difficult.
So you can tell me what will fade and what won't in my picture.
It's pretty predictable, yeah.
And so I should either take that into account when I'm making a picture.
No, I think not. I think we stay in business by.
But you could paint a picture.
Yeah.
You could paint a picture with mixing the pigments and then knowing it would turn into a completely different picture in 500 years.
Well, if you keep the light levels really low, at 50.
No, but if you intended some to fade,
Oh, that, yeah.
so you have a secret message that comes out later on.
Can I ask you a question? We're going to keep coming back to materials. It's something that we share and we are fascinated with. But I wanted to ask as well, you mentioned, the Alison Lapper works that you've done. I mean, questions of beauty and the body, they recur in really diverse ways and diverse bodies in your work. And I'd just love to hear you say a bit more about this. Perhaps you could talk about the Lapper projects that you've done, but there's something so, it feels so kind of immediate and present, but it's actually been something you've been working through for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think just sort of, I started by doing sculptures with my own body in the 90s. Then I thought I wanted to do more interesting, different things. I think, I'm not sure what's here. And let's go back. Oh. I can't remember what was in this. I think we passed it on. Yeah, so Alison Lapper was part of a series of sculpture I did of other disabled people's bodies. And it was sort of seeing people in the British Museum looking at fragmented classical sculptures, and everyone going, oh, isn't it so beautiful? I love the Venus de Milo and the Louvre and stuff. And then thinking, but if someone who looked like that came in, they'd probably react in a slightly different way. They'd feel awkward. They wouldn't know how to speak to the person. And so I thought it was really interesting, this kind of what you accept in art, but not in a real person. So from that really basic idea, I just had another basic idea, is I'll just make a sculpture of a real person whose body is different, but make it in a kind of neoclassical marble way, so like a Canova of someone with a very different kind of body, and I'll see what happens. So I did these, and we don't unfortunately have pictures, but of 10 different people, some who are Paralympians and different people who, through illness or accident or other obviously very dramatic and life-altering reasons, have different shaped bodies. And then they turned out that then it was having made the first one of Peter Hull, who's a guy who was born with no arms and no legs and who won a gold swimming medal in Paralympics. I realized that they were really about celebrating different kinds of bodies and celebrating the diversity of what could be beautiful. And they felt like sculptures from the future in some weird way, because they were using the traditional material of civic or cultural celebration, but for very different kinds of people and bodies. So then when there was the competition for the fourth plinth, I kind of thought it'd be really interesting to put Alison there, because she was the completely opposite of everyone in the square. They were all old dead guys who'd conquered the world, and she was a living woman who was not about the past, about conquering something, but she was in the present moment, and then because she was pregnant, in the future as well. So it's kind of, she was like the antidote to everything in the square, and so then it had a lot, and then it had a lot of effect on how people thought about disability and other things in England and around the world. And it just made me realize that putting content in the public realm is incredibly important, and also people definitely rise to the occasion. That there's a sense in the art world that people think, oh, so people wouldn't understand outside the art world. But I completely disagree, and I think that anyone can understand or have their own understanding of art. So I'm very interested in putting things in the public realm. And this is one of the things that enabled me to do that. And then there's actually an interesting idea about the transformation of materials in these two pieces. So the one on the right is in the Paralympics, and the people who organised it came and there was like, so we'd like you to bring the sculpture in, there'll be a 3 minutes, it'll go dark, well, we go to Stephen Hawking at that end, and then we'll come back and the sculpture will be there. And I was like, well, it weighs about 7 tons, and it's actually tiny. It's only 3 meters high. Yeah. It's not going to work. And so I looked into different materials, and I looked into this process which has now got even better, where you can scan an object, and then from that scan make an inflatable. They cut a perfect kind of, the cloth into perfect sort of things and sew it together. And then it's got air inside it, and so you can have that not there and then suddenly appear. So it was a technical idea for that one night, but then as soon as I made it, I realized it was very interesting, because it's like a living, breathing, it's much more human than the marble one. It's soft, you touch it, it's like it's alive, it's kept up by breath, it has lots of seams, it feels like it's lived, it's like it's got signs of process and experience and life in it. So I realized it was actually really interesting as a standalone sculpture, and I showed it after this at the Venice Biennale,
Yeah.
And there it was in front of San Giorgio. But it was but it's interesting how technical necessity actually comes up with something that's intellectually interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't always happen, but in this case it did. And so it's always interesting when, instead of knowing what I'm going to make, the thing tells me what I should be, how I should be even thinking about it. Not even making it because it was made, but instead of just thinking of it as something that was there for one night only, to realise it's actually an important work in itself, but not for the reasons that you might think.
That is, I mean, it's so interesting. It's such a powerful work, and it's, you know, to see it now, we remember just how visible it was, and about making something visible that is kind of, you know, invisible.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a politics to that as well. Yeah. Slightly different to the body modifications that you've also worked on. I wonder if you could talk a bit about.
Well, the next step. So here's Alison, and
yeah.
that's Peter Hull actually.
Yeah.
So that's a remake of The Kiss. That was from, I don't think that is right, I think it's earlier in 2006, but anyway. Yeah, so here two people from this series around 2009-10 of people who transform themselves, and you've got two different kind of ways of doing that, I suppose. On the left is Chelsea Charms, who's a lady, she's from America, and she's had extremely large breast implants, which you know, she's transformed herself in a way that makes you question ideas of the body, and also it's slightly disturbing, but you know, it's what she wants to do. It's an interesting and strange symptom of our time, maybe in some way. And then on the right you've got Thomas Beattie, who was a trans man who started life as a woman, but then became a trans man, but then decided that he wanted to have a baby, so stopped taking testosterone, and his body reverted to the female hormones. And then he got pregnant and had the baby, and then reverted back to being a trans man again. So this was really, all these complicated things were even more complicated in this case. And throughout the whole thing he kept his beard as well. So it was really bringing in the whole idea of what any fixed ideas of gender or yourself is, and that the self and gender, all these things are processes and things that become. And it felt like it was important to bring those ideas into art, because they hadn't really, they'd been marginalised from it.
Yeah, this is a very different form of portraiture, so in a way it's back to one of the more, you know, the most familiar genres of art, right? But doing something kind of
But it's here the subject matter that changes it. And then these are two other sculptures. The one on the left called Zombie Boy, who's a guy called Rick Ganest, who unfortunately died recently, and he had all these tattoos all over himself. So I made a sculpture with Rick and turned the tattoos into relief sculpture on his body. And then on the right is the back only, unfortunately, I don't know why, of the sculpture of Laurence, who's again had, it's really about people transforming themselves and turning themselves into their own cultural contexts, really. You know, we don't have, everyone could choose your own, there's no such thing as a common cultural context really anymore. You can just choose from what you like. And Laurence, for instance, is of African descent, and she decided to do keloid scarring on her back, but with designs that she came up with. And then she had tattoos, and then she's wearing, you know, Timberland. So it's this whole kind of mixture of, they're kind of like urban bodhisattvas or something. There's sort of these kind of people who are kind of reclaiming their biological selves for their cultural selves in some way.
And what are these made from? Is this?
These are concrete.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting because it's this kind of brutal architectural material, but actually it has very much the same reflectivity as skin. And when you make a figurative sculpture in it, it has this kind of lovely, soft, skin-like quality, and all the tiny little faults in it are like all the kind of tiny little things on your face, and it makes it feel very alive, actually, when you're in the presence of it.
Now, in terms of time, just being watchful, I wonder if...
Should we want the film?
Yeah, if we should maybe...
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it. Just talk about that, because it just happens to be there. 1800, really? Yes, that's true. So that I bought this Japanese bonsai tree from 1800.
It really is
From 1800, and then I felt it was so sad in a way that this little tree had been suppressed and repressed for 350 years, and kept tiny and like tied up in a sense. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to do a series where I liberate bonsai trees, and so make a sculpture of them, but bring them back to the scale of a real tree. So this is a bronze version of that tree that's 5.5 meters high, and that's a real bird on top, not part of the sculpture, that just sort of came and landed, and that's in Sculpture Park in America. So, so again, using form, and this is made using a mixture of, every single leaf on that tree is cast in bronze in a centrifuge.
Because we don't want to, looking at it and knowing how difficult it is to make, hollow shapes and those things, it was just hard.
And then the trunk is made in the base of a 3D scan of the original. So it's using technology in the scanning and printing that didn't exist 5 years ago, but it doesn't look... I like using technology, but not in a way that you can see when you look at it. I don't like art that's like, oh, there's technology art, it's really exciting, because there's nothing... It's like looking at a CGI film from 5 years ago, that's awful. You have to kind of use it in a way that's hidden.
And that's, But one of the questions I wanted to ask you is if with your increasing success, presumably you've also been able to use more and more complicated and possibly expensive technology. So being led by the material is one thing, but then also being able to realize things in media and with processes that you weren't able to before. Do you think that is always a great freedom that you've gained, or do you think it's sometimes also a burden?
Well, you have to do it responsibly, otherwise you can end up making enormous bits of rubbish. But hopefully, and I think the other thing is that if I have the possibility to make things, that I need to do things that have meaning as well, and that are part of the thing, and that brings us nicely onto... these are the sculptures that were in the John Soane Museum, which are made from life casts of in fiberglass of my then girlfriend and my arms in each one, and so they're kind of autobiographical, but they're also about fragments and about classical. And in fact, that sort of Degas-like tutu occurred randomly because she put a plastic bin liner in her tracksuit top legs where we were moulding the top of her, and then the dental rubber moulded that, but I really like that, and it serves as a transition between the top and the bottom of the sculpture. And on the bottom legs as well, it's the same thing. It's like the bin liners tied around her shoes end up being like the froth in a Mercury statue or something, or the birth of Venus or something like that, coming up, And then I put the first one of them on this art moving box I had at the studio, and then I realised that actually every label on the art moving box could be applied to relationships as well. So it was quite an accurate, can with care, keep away from glasses of wine, that kind of thing. And also then what I like is that there's this sense of what's in the box. It's almost like the unconscious of this artwork is in the box as well.
Which you're standing on.
Yeah. And these are...
How large are these?
This one is very big. It's kind of about 3 meters long. But they're based on actual plaster casts of hands that are then 3D scanned and made bigger. So you have all those bubbles, air bubbles and faults you can see on the fingers, and they're all kept in the big one as well. But, yeah.
So we can do, so Jim, can you do, thank you.
The refugee crisis is undoubtedly one of the greatest humanitarian tragedies in the world now. I wanted to make a sculpture that was about the refugee crisis. I wanted to make a collaborative project so that the money that the sculpture raised also went to help refugee causes.
It is the ultimate, purest symbolism of how we are one, of how there is truly no difference between us.
People don't get it. People don't get that refugees are normal human beings.
I really want this to be a public artwork, so that people walking down the street can see it. One element is a pavilion on the steps of New York Public Library that Norm Foster's designed, which is almost completely transparent. Within that, you see these 2 plinths, and on those plinths are 2 cubes, which are meter by meter by meter. Each one weighs a ton, and each one is made of frozen human blood. One of them is donated by certain refugees. One is donated by people who see themselves not as refugees. But neither block is labelled. They're like genetic twins. They're like a pair of centuries. They're like people standing together.
It was horrific. The thing about blood, till now, like till I heard about the project, I thought, no, blood can help. So I shouldn't be afraid of blood, of seeing blood, or giving blood.
Each person's given blood is also offered the chance to make a short film. And those short films will appear around the city on advertising hoardings with subtitles, so that the people who appear in an abstract form in the sculpture will end up virtually populating the city with their stories.
I like the art piece going around to different countries, because that's part of the awareness, and that's part of the movement.
Awareness, then you get solidarity, then you start action, and this is a democratic way how you win.
The most important thing that all the money that's going to be raised in this project is going to help the most vulnerable people.
I always try to explain to people that we are all equal. We have the same blood, but I didn't know how to explain it.
I think there's something very potent about this concept that's going to move people when they see it. I think people are going to want to contribute, and people are going to want to be involved.
It's a call to action, but it's also a practical help.
From what I've seen, Marc's imagination and creativity and vision for this particular artwork is so monumental and so important. I don't see how anyone could not take notice.
My blood.
My blood, my blood.
And your blood.
It's the same under the skin.
We're all the same. My blood.
My blood, my blood. And refugee blood is the same. Under the skin, we are all the same.
Do we go straight to the other one, would you like to?
Yeah, no, isn't there a slide? Yeah, there's a slide.
Yeah, there's 2.
Yeah, so basically, it's almost like taking all the previous ideas and squashing them into one thing. It's taking the idea of self, but then making it with 5,000 people instead of with one person. It's about diversity in people and how we value people, you know, from people that are so undervalued you won't let them in your country, to people who are absurdly overvalued because they're incredibly famous, and then putting them on the same level. It's like Alison Lapper about putting content into the public realm, and it's about challenging the public and challenging people with an artwork and trying to bypass a debate that can get bogged down in, you know, news stories and this, to try and make people think about it in a different way. And it's from a very simple idea, which is that, you know, we all have blood coursing through our veins. You can't deny that, and once you accept that, it's very difficult to say some people are like this and some people are not like this. So it's kind of about humans, and the idea is that the artwork travels around to different countries, Western and non-Western countries, and it's it's a not-for-profit project as well. So all the money that's raised from selling it, from people donating money, and from all that will go to help refugee charities. So it's sort of, yeah, it's a big project that I'm working on at the moment.
And it's going to run for a period of years, or
yeah,
I mean,
just
the
keep
same
on
way that
going,
Self
hopefully.
I see.
Just going around the world to different places.
Why did you choose cubes?
Because it's almost, it's, you know, in some ways it's brutally abstract. The idea of putting the human into, it's like when you see all those thousands of people squashed into a boat. It's this idea of putting but then it's also incredibly strong. All the people coming together, and they're like genetic libraries, you know. It's in front of the New York Public Library, but in each block is all the ancestry and migration and information about all the people who've donated the blood, and we're hoping to also sequence all the DNAs of all the people as well, and probably find that the migration patterns are pretty similar, because obviously migration is basically the basis of human history, and it's only very recently that it's become a political issue. So I think there's something kind of paradoxical and compelling about a human form in abstract form being mixed up. And then I think it's in the stories, in people's, the way that the people who give the blood in their films, which are shown on moving image billboards around wherever it is, that you unpack the human quality of it in a way. So you have the two things existing at the same time.
It's an explicitly political work, isn't it? This
well,
one
it's humanitarian, I think. I mean, it has political aspects depending on where you show it, but it's not intended to be political. It's intended to be about how we value people and a human crisis, and about helping people.
And how long have this been in the planning?
I think quite a long time already. 3 years, I think, 4 years. I think I had the idea in 2015 or 16, and then we've just been building the whole thing and getting it going. And so it's going to go in 2021, spring 21 is when it'll be in here. Yeah.
In this pavilion.
Exactly.
It's now maybe a good moment to...
Did you want to watch the other film?
No, let's have some questions.
Yeah. To open the floor to questions from the audience. I don't know if we have microphones to...
Do you want to?
Okay, all right.
There we go.
Yes, thank you.
Do you document your hidden paintings? What's behind them?
So far, yes. But I don't know if I was, again, thinking about today whether I ultimately will for all of them or not. If you don't know what's behind your picture, it's a bit terrifying, because it could be anything. Someone might just scrape it all off to see, and then they probably wouldn't find anything.
I just wonder, how do you see your work evolving over the next 5-10 years?
I don't really think like that. I just go sort of project by project or body of work by body of work. So however it goes, I don't plan really in that way.
Thanks. Thank you, Marc, for talking us through some of your work this evening. I'm really interested in hearing more about your process with the sculptures of people like Chelsea Charms and Thomas Beattie, for example. What's your process with the real people behind those artworks? How do you find or approach them? How do you work with them? And if you know, what's their response to those artworks been?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think also there's really much, the kind of sculptures about virtuality and reality, and about the internet and abstraction as well, because basically I've found the people by sort of Googling things like trans people or extreme surgery or tattooing, and then I'd find a picture of someone and then follow that through down till I found perhaps a Facebook page or some other way of contacting the person, and then send them an email saying, I'd love to make a sculpture with you, are you interested? And I don't think anyone said no. And then they were all mostly in America, and I would say, okay, well, here's it, I'll buy you a ticket to come to London and do a sitting. And so then, having been looking on the internet, sort of 3 weeks later, open the door of the studio and there's a real person standing there. And there's this kind of weird thing of like between image and reality. It's almost like they've been sort of summoned up in some way. And then I worked with the person, you know, to work out what kind of pose it would be, and sort of just got to know them a bit and hung out with them, and then did in most of these cases for the 2010 ones, just did a process of doing sort of, you know, hundreds of pictures around them and lots of measurements, and then making a clay sculpture from that, and then moulding that, and then in some cases making it get transformed into a marble sculpture working with craftsmen in Italy, and some of them cast in bronze sculptures and some of them cast in concrete sculptures. So once you have the original thing, but now I'm using 3D scanning as well and different things, which is much easier in a way because you only need the person for a 60th of a second instead of 3 days or something. So, and that's more, I'm doing a few projects with that around the world, so taking the actual scanning thing to, I'm doing a project in India and sort of making sculptures with people from India and from the West and sort of mixing it up. And so I think there's lots of different ways of doing it, but it's really about engaging with the person as well, and making it something that's, I mean, it's still my artwork, but there's an element of collaboration and interaction there. And I think that if you put that much effort into transforming your body, then the idea of making an artwork of yourself, which sort of puts it in a more permanent, less transformable material, is always attractive. So everyone who did it, who was one of the models, has been happy with the result.
Thank you. So I was really struck earlier this afternoon when I was looking at your sculpture at the Welcome, Innocence, at how solid it seems, but how the reason for making it kind of calls to mind fragility. And so I've been trying to kind of articulate in a way a kind of question all afternoon about the fragility that seems to be a part of the process too. So self is literally fragile, right? The freezer gets tripped off and it disappears. Or even breath, you put a pin in it and it also just kind of evaporates. So I haven't quite articulated my question, but there's something about fragility that seems to run through a lot of your work that I just wanted to talk about. I think,
you know, it's about the fragility of life, isn't it, and existence. And I think it's a reflection of a sense of that. So it's in a way a kind of memento mori type thing, but not really that, but just the sense that life exists and then it cannot exist. And so it's sort of, but still celebrating it at the same time. So it's just an awareness of our fragility in a way, I think, that fits in lots of the different works.
I was just wondering what role, if any, drawing or sketching or that.
Sorry?
I wondered what role, if any at all, that sketching or drawing played in your in making.
Yeah, I mean,
decisions.
I do drawings. I tend to find that if I draw something too well, then that becomes the artwork and it kills it. So my drawings are really, they look terrible, because they want to be as ambiguous as possible, because I don't want to tie down. I find that if I draw something, then it kind of dies in some way, and I prefer to actually make the process with the materials themselves. Although I do some drawings, and I mean in sketchbook particularly, they're very loose and almost nothing, and I almost prefer to write a word than to draw something, to write an idea and leave it as open-ended as possible, rather than, I don't know, the time to make a really finished drawing. I'd rather make the actual work. But then I do drawings as well, so it's kind of love-hate relationship. Interesting question.
Hi, I was wondering how come, because you say you make the self every 5 years, but I was just wondering if the last one you made was in 2011, and there hasn't been one since.
No, there was. 2016.
There was? It's on your website, though. Or
it's not on our website. Okay. The reason it's not on the website is that I took the blood and I haven't finished it yet, because I'm upgrading the refrigeration system. After I make the new blood sculpture, the people who are making that freezer are more high-tech. So since I'm going to keep that sculpture anyway, I've not yet made the thing. But you're right, we could put a post of the head on it. It's a good point.
Hey, yeah, I was kind of meaning to ask about the blood. Say this project kind of ended, this new one. What do you do with it? Just have a big freezer full of blood at home? I'd like, well, I mean, do you dispose of it?
Well, you're not going to dispose of it because it's an artwork. The idea is that someone will buy it and keep it in the public realm.
Okay.
So, yeah, hopefully there's not that disposal issue. But if there was, I guess you'd have to get a medical, the people who dispose of things in hospitals to do it.
We've got time maybe for one more. Oh, look at that, 2 hands, excellent. Can we have 2 more then? Can we go? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to ask whether you're going to add your own blood to the new project.
Definitely.
And can I also
and anyone here can as well. You just go to the website ourblood.org and register.
Oh.
It's a lottery or ballot, because there's only probably 3,000 to 5,000 people who can get into it.
And you might have mentioned this, but I wanted to ask, why are the blocks separate, and what's the difference between the two?
There's no difference between them.
So
that's the idea.
Mixed.
I mean, the 2 ideas which I play with now is either to have one with blood from refugees and one with blood from non-refugees, so that in a way they're the same, you're shown the same, or maybe just commingle the whole lot and just split it into 2. So I'm still playing with that idea.
And we just have one last question down here. Thank you.
One thing I've noticed through some of the works is that you're bringing, a lot of it is about representation of people from the peripheries, trying to bring them into the centre. So my question is, what are your feelings about this? What are your intentions about this? And as an artist, do you feel that that's your role? Just your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's my role. It's part of the reality of the world as I see it, is that the whole discourse of what the world is, who's in it and who should be recorded in it, is the future is a much wider view of that. And I think that also by bringing different and diverse people into art, it helps in society as well, I think. And it's just more interesting you know, it's much more interesting to have lots of different kinds of people than just one kind of person. So it makes for better art. It's more of a reflection of what the world is, and it's how I think society should be. So it's sort of a mixture of all those different things, I suppose.
Thank you very much. So I just want to thank you so much. This has been so exciting for all of us here. You know, this event sold out in seconds once we advertised it, but your willingness and generosity to talk with us about the detail and the materials, as well as the big conceptual ideas, has been really exciting and demonstrates to so many of us that are all in the room here how the one feeds into the other, and that we need to think seriously about the thing itself in all its complexities. So thank you so very much, and thank you all for coming and for your questions. And just before we thank Marc, just to remind you that if you'd like to join us on the 3rd floor, the stairs are right at the end, or there's 2 lifts here. In the 3rd floor in the common room, we're going to go and have a glass of wine there. But please now just join me in thanking Marc for his time tonight.